Hello, welcome to the Winners Find a Way show. I am your host, Trent Clark. I am excited to be with you here this Friday. Friday's always a good day, love it. And I am with my friend, Tyler Pigott. How are you doing, Tyler?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me. This is going to
Did
be
I get
fun.
that right?
Oh, yeah, you got it. Nailed it.
Yeah, that's right. Nice. All right. So I'm hitting Tyler way up early in the morning. Tyler's on the West Coast, the Pacific Northwest. Welcome everybody to the show. Super excited to get going here on a day. For those who are just joining the Winners Find a Way show for the first time, we interview 1%ers, people that have done some things in their lives, have faced some adversity along the way. And if you are looking for your chance to be elite, you're looking for something greater, improving yourself all the time, you're elite and the CEO, athlete, wherever you are in your place in life and looking to get better, I believe this is the show. And I bring on people that can help you get there. So super excited, Tyler, for you to join us. Tyler, tell them a little bit where they can find you first.
Okay, the best places to find me, three different places. One is our company website, so loanforcreative.com. I think that stuff will be in the show notes and whatnot. Probably the most active on LinkedIn, just my first and last name on LinkedIn. Check me out. Spent a fair amount of time on Twitter and then also email. So we'll throw all that stuff in the show notes.
Wow.
Happy to chat with people, ask questions, answer questions, all that good stuff.
That's awesome. Okay, for me, I am your host, Trent Clark, CEO of Leadershipity, serial entrepreneur. I am also the CEO of AIM for NIL, our NIL group, helping educate young athletes how to be entrepreneurs and learn in this crazy game of NIL. So I am also a longtime coach in professional baseball, coaching in 3 World Series, and a professional speaker speaking all over the world. Tyler, you share that with me as a speaker yourself. Is that right?
I do. I spend a fair amount of time talking to people.
Yeah, that's and
Yeah.
and I always love that when I talk to fellow speakers, because when people don't speak and they go, "Man, so you get up in front of hundreds of people or thousands of people and talk to them?" I'm like, "Yeah, all the
Yep.
time." And they're like, "Oh my gosh, that's that. It's that fear for certain folks,
Totally.
right? That go like,
That's
"Oh my god,
terrifying for some people.
yeah, yeah, yeah."
Yeah,
And
totally.
yeah, that's very different for me. And I get nervous. Listen, man, I
Yeah,
get I get like game butterflies, right? I mean, I
yeah.
definitely feel heightened. I mean, I don't want to go up there and screw up like anybody else, but
Yeah.
fortunately, I've done it and lived to tell the tale.
Mhm.
So,
Totally.
hey, it's not that bad. Like, you know what?
Yeah.
You make mistakes, you error, and you move on, right?
Yep. Yeah, I think once you've kind of fallen on your face publicly, at least once, twice, 10 times, whatever it is, you kind of realize, oh, that's actually pretty normal. And I don't know. I mean, I think that you can kind of recover from it pretty easily.
For
I also think people relate to it a little bit more when there's like, it's not just this perfectly polished thing, you know? Like
Yeah.
you've got to be well practiced and disciplined, all that stuff. But at the same standpoint, being the most real version of a human, I think is probably, if you show up that way, it usually gets received much better. So,
Yeah. Yeah, I think we have to show our vulnerabilities a little bit, right? The
yeah.
authentic self, with is sometimes, tripping over a mic cord, and so done it before,
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
totally.
I don't think
Yep.
I've fully gone down yet on a stage, but I think pretty close.
I had
Um,
one 3 weeks ago. We were in Florida, and it's like one of those like shorter stages. So it was whatever, 2.5, 3 feet. And so I'm like, oh yeah, I'm just gonna like jump, high energy. I'm just gonna like jump. Totally caught my foot and then fell as I'm entering the stage. It was a rough entry. So
yeah,
that was my
nice.
first one where I was like, cool. I don't know if it can get much worse. So
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
um,
This can only get better at this
yeah,
point. Like that's
yeah,
that's that's the beautiful part of it. Well, that's awesome. Okay, so let's learn a little bit about you, Tyler.
yeah.
Pacific Northwest native, live out in Gig Harbor, which I love. One of the most beautiful places in the world. If you have not been, it is
Yeah.
incredible. What did you tell me? 3 or 4 months of the year. It's
I mean,
incredible.
stick to the summer months if you really want it to be gorgeous.
Yeah.
It's great year round, but those are the months where it's like, oh yeah, this is why I live here. Like it's a good memory. So
Well,
yeah.
what was the one, Sleepless in Seattle? Wasn't he didn't he live in Gig Harbor?
No, oh man, there is a really famous actor that, which is great because I'm not gonna be able to come up with his name.
Yeah.
Um, the only movie I'm remembering, which is gonna be great, my wife will be proud, but the movie Sweet Home Alabama. He was like
Okay, yeah.
the male lead that was in that, and he's from Gig
Yes.
Harbor.
There we go. Okay, good.
Yeah.
Glad you remembered
Yeah.
that. Boom.
Wow,
All right.
I'm
So,
impressed. I wasn't
yeah,
prepared for that.
CEO of Loan Fur Creative. Tell me about that name. Where'd that Loan Fur? Come on, man. Where's this come from?
So I spent about 15 years in the corporate space, got the opportunity to transition out of a startup that I've been a part of there. And this was 2014, 2015 timeframe. And of course, naturally, hey, what do you do next? I became a college golf coach. Not usually what you do next. That was a lot of sarcasm if you didn't pick it up. But we played, so I hung out with college kids, played golf like 4 or 5 days a week. And one of the courses we played at frequently was called Chambers Bay. And so if you're any PGA fans out there, 2015 US Open host was Chambers Bay, which is in the Pacific Northwest here. And they have a single lone fir tree. And so one of the times we were walking around, and I love college kids because they're just straight to the point. And they said, hey, I've seen the car you drive. You're young. You're probably not independently wealthy. How on earth can you be out here in the afternoon playing golf with us? So it was great. So I said, hey, I run my own company, yada, yada. I was able to transition out of something, had a little bit of runway. And then they asked the name of my company. And I said, like, it was just my name. It was like Tyler Pigott Consulting or whatever it was there in the early days. And they basically said, that's the dumbest name ever and that you need to rename it. And so then I just opened it up and I said, cool, what do you guys think I should name it? So then we batted around for a couple of weeks walking that golf course. And one of the kids said, hey, you should name it Lone Fur, like the tree on the golf course. And so it stuck, and it's been that way for about 8 years.
Awesome. Love it. Good story. Yeah. That's funny, man. Like, and it's just like a college kid. No, that's a horrible name.
Totally. Yeah. Which I love my name, I'm right? Like direct communication. Yeah, exactly. Totally. I won't be offended. It's fine. It's just my name.
Right. So a lot of digital work. You build brands on HubSpot and brand messaging, lead gen, amplifying messages. A lot of work in ed tech. Sounds pretty awesome. Now, family, got a couple girls in their teens. That's awesome. Married, been married over 20 years. Awesome stuff. Tell me about the kids. Tell me about the teenagers. What do they see from dad as an entrepreneur, someone running his own brand? You're the guy who doesn't have to buy to corporate America. Like, grow your hair long, look cool. Like, come on, man. Like, you got some advantages, man.
I mean, I guess so. Yeah. All right. I mean, I'm going to get into like real fast. So I grew up in an entrepreneurial family. My dad grew a company, about 600 employees, ran it for 25 years. Wow. And didn't end well. Like it essentially kind of fizzled in the early 2000s. But one of the things that I took away from that is not really observing my dad in the highs and lows. So he was pretty steady and didn't really ever process things where you ever got to be a part of it. And so you didn't know if things were going great or you didn't know if things were horrible, And so I take that into this entrepreneurial adventure, and I try to bring my family and everything. And we talk literally last night at the dinner table, we were talking about some of the challenges that are going on at work today and some of the things that we might have to do because of it, or some of the things we have done, and trying to bring them into the highs and bring them into the lows of what's going on. And also just being super grateful for me being able to get to do what I'm doing and have a little more flexibility and being around more maybe in their lives. And so I think that's ideally that's kind of what they see, a little bit more. I did switch to working for myself. One of the factors was I wanted to be around my family more. I used to travel like 2-3 weeks a month, and when I was on the corporate side, and I just wasn't part really of I was missing so many things.
Yeah.
And so probably familiar story for many, but the idea of getting to be around and more present, I think, in their lives has been highlight for me. And I like to think that they also recognize that as being something that's unique compared to maybe some of their friends and whatnot that they're around. So,
yeah, I think that's a big deal. I mean, was it that way with your dad? I mean, was your dad gone a lot? Was he working long hours and busting it to make it? 600 employees is a big company, man. I mean, people go, hey, listen, that doesn't sound like so much. That's not like, Microsoft. And you're like, I get it. But 600 people, like you employ 600 people. I mean, if you just talk about that very quickly, at $50,000 a year per person in a $60,000 or in a 600 company, you're talking about $3 million in payroll a year, right? So, the company has to at least make that to make, to make payroll, right? And of course you have cost of goods sold and everything else. So it becomes pretty big business pretty fast. And and the other thing that we do in Leadershipity that I think you'll find interesting is that when we think of 600 employees as we coach up middle market companies who often have very similar numbers, is that you're making decisions for 2,400 people because the average family has about 4 people, right? And this is their lifeblood, right? Like this is what helps pay for the car and for food and for college and whatever they want to do. And so, hey, when you start making these decisions, you're not just making a decision for your employee, you're where they're going to live, what they're going to do next. And it's a lot of responsibility for an owner and an executive in those kind of firms. And we don't hold that lightly. So talk to me a little bit about your father's experience.
Yeah. Math wise, you got to add a 0, I think. So 50,000 times 600 is about 30 million.
I'm sorry. Thank you.
I just it's just a big difference in numbers.
Yeah, that is.
Yeah. I mean, he had like 13 different schools. So he ran a vocational school. And so he spent a lot of time on the road going between schools, kind of up from Northern California up to Bellingham and Washington State. So up and down the West Coast, basically. He was an early riser, would leave, rarity to remember him being around for like a breakfast kind of thing, a couple of days a week. I was one of those people raised, I was raised on a farm. So I was raised on a Christmas tree farm. So that's a whole nother probably podcast, but, on the weekends, I remember sleeping in till like maybe 7:30 or 8 and totally like in high school and thinking it was like, kind of like I was a failure because my dad had already mowed 5 acres and painted a barn or something. So I would say he instilled a pretty intense work ethic, but a lot of that was because I wanted to hang out with him. Like, you'd go wherever he was, and that's kind of how it worked. And so he was, great dad. It's super fun to still have a relationship with him now, which is unique, I know. But I would say I've learned a lot from him, learned a lot of the highs, the lows, the things to do, maybe the things to stay away from. But it was an interesting, I would say it was a unique upbringing because of the fact that I got to watch the company grow, because it started the year I was born and then ended about 25 years later. So the peak of it was kind of like my, I suppose, I don't know, late junior high school days kind of thing. So I remember it pretty well. I remember the ups and downs of it. And then I'll oftentimes now go back and ask, because I'll remember whatever like the emotion or result of something was. And then I'll go ask my dad, well, what happened during that time? And I'm still having those conversations. We'll grab a beer here and there, and like we'll talk. I'll ask him questions about it. And part of it was because, like I mentioned earlier, he wasn't super verbal then. But he's totally willing to talk about it now, which is kind of cool 20 plus years later. So
yeah.
When
you said, he went through some challenges in that business, right? And, like you said, anyone who's got a business for 25 years, there's plenty of ups and downs. I've never heard someone go, oh yeah, I owned this brand for 25 years. It was just all ups, I don't remember having a down period actually. Okay. But, totally. So that's cool, having those conversations still. I think that's what a blessing, right?
Yeah.
And
cool.
So let's talk a little bit about, now you're this guy, you're a marketing guru, which is funny, man, because like you're like the super hip dude, the long hair, like come on, man. And then marketing guys are, marketing people in general, thoughtful, usually outgoing. But you're the introvert guy. What most people don't know about you, you're kind of like low, kind of like, hey, I don't really want to be out there. You wouldn't mind still being on the Christmas tree farm.
Well, I think probably that's like over the last 3 years, everybody started working at home. They're like, I just want to farm. Like, I don't want to stare at a computer screen anymore. So I might not be that unique on that. But I think I have a weird blend of I love being around people. Like, I love people. I like interacting, building relationships, understanding, listening, understanding what people are all about. But I also really value my time without people and getting to have my own space. And I kind of tend to recharge more in my alone time, not with a crowd of people, comparatively to like the, I suppose, true extrovert where they get energized by being in groups of people, I'm kind of a closet introvert, I guess, that oftentimes people mistake it a little bit. But conferences, all that kind of stuff, they are so exhausting. Great to be at. I do, again, love being around all the people. it just is, I have to escape and stare at a wall for a while usually. So
It's interesting. I think COVID's changed that for some people. Like I think that people found out like, wow, I can engage and be in a relationship and be in good relationships without having to do all that. I know a number of clients of mine who are like, hey, we went out to the trade show and we kicked some butt. We sold a bunch of stuff and it's tiring, but I feel the energy and I still get that. I still get that like, I get a lot of energy from travel and meeting new people and speaking, right? And getting out in front of those newer audiences that, especially from areas that I haven't been engaged in, because I love the learning part, right?
Yeah.
And so what makes people tick and what they're focused on today. Yet, it feels like it's more tiring now than it used to be. Like when I get done at the end of the week, I'm like, wow. And maybe it's because I got so used to not having to travel. And I think travel's got a little less efficient. so it probably is. It probably takes a little longer now. So it probably does wear a little bit. But I think it's really cool. And so let's talk a little bit about you as a kid. Now,
sure.
You're growing up watching your dad, entrepreneur. It sounds like the Christmas tree farm was a whole separate, family operation. And then, is this what you knew? Like you knew, like, hey, I'm gonna grow up. I'm gonna own businesses like my dad. This is what I'm gonna do, and I'm gonna start my own company. And
I think, I would say I always had like a desire to own my own business or multiple. But I would say based on just like the way that kind of his company kind of went, went bankrupt at the end kind of thing, like, which most of everything was just out of his control, which is, hard to watch and all that kind of stuff. I probably got a little bit like, oh my gosh, I don't know if I want to do that, kind of a little, there's a couple of large holes, I guess, that were created that I was going to dodge, and I think probably for me, like I'm generally, which I think most entrepreneurs are, but I'm a generalist. So I'm not like I only do this one thing really well, but I can do a bunch of different things. And so I think probably it was really hard for me to figure out, well, what is a company? Like, what would I do? Like, what's the company? Like, it's hard to figure that out oftentimes. So I say all that, but then I go back to like, for me, I remember my first job, which was like maybe a sophomore in high school. And I carried a weed whacker or a weed eater, at a camp, like at a summer camp. And I worked for 3 weeks. And then they realized that I wasn't over the age of 16 yet. I think it was like 15 and a half or something. And then they didn't pay me because they weren't able to or something. And I kind of was like, well, this is dumb. I don't really want to do this. And so I actually started a DJ company and started DJing weddings and corporate events and high school dances. Yeah, totally. Yeah, super funny. Oh my gosh. But like, that's what I did for the rest of high school. And then I actually paid my way through college as a DJ because this was pre-iTunes, pre-create your own playlist days, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So it's vinyl.
This is vinyl or CD.
Oh, this is like, totally. It was like, I remember when the first Sony Discman came out, those black ones that, were like 2 inches thick. And if you touched them, they skipped, like that whole thing.
Yeah.
But that was like I guess, first generation of being able to like mix from one track to another. And then you bring in vinyl and all that kind of stuff. But anyway, all that being said, like I've always had like these entrepreneurial bones in my body that, I'm going to go out and try to make my own way, I guess, on this. And part of that's because it's fun and exciting and new and it's adventure and there's unknowns and there's risk. And then there's part of that I go, well, there's so much more opportunity there versus, go get a job, get paid this much, have these responsibilities, and there's a little bit of a cap. So I probably have always had that entrepreneurial bone, whether or not I knew that it was there or not. It just was kind of like how I was wired, I suppose. So
yeah. Well, I think there's some power in the fact, like, most people I talk to in the entrepreneur space are a little bit like myself. I was delivering papers when I was 25. My first entrepreneurial moment came really in the paper route when I went to junior high football practice and I had 3 routes. I was a pretty big deal in my neighborhood, right? And they were giving me more routes, from the time from 5th to 7th. Well, now I was getting into school sports, so I didn't really have a lot of control over the schedule. And so now after school, instead of delivering papers, I had to go to practice. And so I paid 3 friends like each $1 to take, one of the routes of the 3. and I'd lay it out and train them up on what they need to do and give them their list. And I would make about $5 a day to do the 3 routes, I think. And so, man, I was like, man, I went to football practice today and made $2. Man, like, check me out, man. Like, I made $10 Monday through Friday going to football practice. So I'm like a pro football player. I'm like getting paid to play football now, like $10 a week, right? You know? And so I thought I was kind of a big deal. And but you realize, like, hey, even though I worked, of course, for the paper, I worked for the newspaper. But then I started, shoveling snow and doing lawns and controlling, the customer service that I already had customers. Yeah. And so some of them became customers of my other business. Right. And so that was, because back then the papers, you did all the collection. I knew all the people I delivered the papers to. Right. Yeah, it wasn't like everybody paid it online. So it was a really interactive thing. And so, man, I mean, I knew I could create value. And even my buddies and I, man, we were like selling stuff like, oh, hey, man, like, I don't even ride this bike anymore, man. You could buy this bike for like $10, Totally. Selling a bike. And, my brothers would go to college. I had older brothers, they'd leave and they had like an old bike. I'd sell it. They're like, dude, what happened to my bike? I'm like, I don't know. I don't know what happened to it. Sold awesome. it, making money. Cause I just knew, like, hey, man, all of a sudden I knew I could make money. And then I think the other thing that really served me well that you might appreciate is like a service business, like the tree business, right? Like you have to talk to people and you have to like, hey, what do they want? What are they looking for? And I want a Douglas fir. No, I want this. I want that, And, waiting tables was a big deal because you were paid on your performance of service, right? Yeah. And it was like, man, that was really important to me. I think that shaped a lot of things from my entrepreneurial journey. So I wish more kids had chances like that at a younger age to start developing that than they do now.
Yeah, no, I would agree. I think like even thinking back through like the DJ experience, like it was, I mean, you had like the person you had to win over was the bride, right? And you'd have to meet with them beforehand, figure out what they want to do, what's the venue going to be like, how, what other, and you're constantly coming up with upsells because, you don't have someone that made your slideshow, or you don't have someone that's going to set up your PA for your ceremony or whatever. And so you can but you're listening to problems throughout and you're listening for how you could potentially solve those. And like, you're just learning that, like you're naturally learning that as you go through it. I think there's tons of ways, obviously besides starting your own gig, that you can do that. But I think, like you said, I just wish there was more of those opportunities, specific to ways kids are getting raised now. An example of that for us, I think we're about to finish an Airbnb, so a rental, like short-term rental, that we're building, and we're finishing it. And particularly, obviously, it's great for a little investment, side money, whatever. But in particular, to give it a job to our kids.
Yeah.
And so that they would learn the customer service piece, answering questions, making sure it's booked. They don't get paid unless it's booked. They don't get a service fee, the cleaning fee unless there's someone been in it, just teaching like kind of like how this works, it doesn't work where you just sit around and wait for your paycheck, like there's so many that do now. So we're excited about that. They've been doing it for other property for somebody else. And so,
are they doing the cleaning?
Cool way to, yeah,
they are. I love this. Yeah, I love it because I will tell you, like, because I own vacation properties, right? I have been with VRBO since like 2005.
Early.
Yeah. I was an early adopter, right? And so when I got in there, man, I quickly learned, like in the first 3 or 4 years, the cleaner is the most important person in your entire business, right? Like they are like the go-between of what's going on in the world, what's happening right now. They're your eyes and your ears. And by the way, if they don't do their job really well, like the guests are never happy, right? Like they're never happy.
Yeah. They're the ones that are like setting up the quote unquote product, right? Like that the product's the house or the apartment or the whatever, and they're the ones that have control over it. They are the most like, most important person for sure.
So let's pivot to a time like, the show is based on, winners, a quote, winners when shown data that they are losing, find a way to win.
Yeah.
And I love that. I love that quote from the 4 Disciplines of Execution, and good book. And man, I have found this so true in my life because I'm looking for solution providers around me to support my team, support my brands, support my companies. And man, I've just noticed that they've made life a lot easier and a lot better for me, for others around them. If they just don't say, wow, that's really bad. The data's not good. Someone should do something about that. I need somebody to say, I will do something about that. Right.
Yeah.
And so, talk to me about a time, coming up in your business ventures here, when you were just really challenged. Like,
Mhm.
man, there's clear that the data, you're not winning, things are not going the right direction. You've got to do something differently. How did you respond to that? What did you do? What was the result?
Man, which one do I pick?
Yeah, right. I know, right?
I think like earliest that I can think of was I had a small like equity stake in it, but worked for an investment group and we launched a consumer product. And I had to pitch the investment group 6 times before they, green lighted what we could do. And that was, hey, here's X amount of money, had a couple commas in it, which was awesome. But you've got 6 months to prove it, and you've got launch it into a test market, build a brand, like the whole thing. And, I think one of the things that like I would say I've taken away from that season, because that was constant, like, just like you had to be gritty, otherwise you wouldn't make it. Like there's no product. You have to create a product and figure out how to get people to pay you for it. And I would say for that, like just kind of like takeaways for me was just I'm not a naturally satisfied person, if that makes sense. So I'm constantly like not naturally satisfied, not naturally content. And so I'm constantly trying to improve, make things more efficient. There's better ways to do this. If this is a challenge, hey man, how can I fix a little bit of it? So maybe if it happened again, it didn't hurt as much, or whatever the scenario is. And so I think in this specific example, just like the hey, no, okay, that way didn't work. Cool. All right. Don't get too down on yourself. It's okay. Revamp and go at it again the next day. And continuing to find a way. And so like, I just remember, hey, there's, you can't even get into Whole Foods. So this was a consumer product and we couldn't get into Whole Foods because it wasn't doing enough market share, didn't have enough. They wouldn't even get up as a meeting at a regional location, because that was back in that day. That's where you would go into a regional location. They'd say yes or no. And then if they said yes, they'd put it out to all their stores. But there was a Whole Foods that was getting built. And so I went to that Whole Foods and basically just like worked my way in, got to know people while they're building it, and literally got to work my way into, I just walked in one day before it was open and asked people that were in the beverage, because it was a consumer beverage product, asked people what does it take to get in one of these coolers? You got to be selling it. Well, how do you get started if you haven't sold any yet? Well, we just got to prove it. And then I just literally just said, hey, well, would you let me prove it here? I've got 3 cases in my car. If these don't move in the first week, don't worry about it. But if they do move in the first week, would you let me put another 3 in? And it was just like that. Like, I mean, I can count, I don't know how many stories I have of that specific scenario in different stores or different, but I just didn't give up. Like, I just believed that there was a way to accomplish it. And that product ended up doing really well, ended up selling hundreds and hundreds of cases, thousands of cases. We got up to like 30,000 a month. But so anyway, it's like that like tenacity or kind of resilience, I guess you could call it, was started to be built in that kind of time frame. I would say in the service business, it translated into that. So like that resilience of trying to get results for clients and just keep going, keep trying to, win people over, to keep trying to, from the sales side, then all the way to when they are a client. How do you, treat them well? How do you make it so that they like working with you, or pumped to send you a check at the end of the month or whatever?
Yeah.
And if I just would keep connecting back to that, like the resilience side of things. And that is something that I feel like you can't go wrong by learning or investing in that skill or that kind of attribute of a personality.
Yeah. Love it. I think that, man, I mean, I can imagine some folks in corporate world America that don't, no, we got to do it the traditional way. You got to go through a buyer. You got to go through this. Like I could see, some bigger brands not actually loving that approach, right? Like, wait a minute,
Yeah.
We don't have enough PO yet, and you're just selling out of your car. Like, that's not the way
Yeah.
we do things, and it's a very different environment, right? I mean, I think it's one of the reasons that I thought I would always struggle in big corporations. And I did work for one, and really I wasn't so much in the corporation by name. I was a small subsidiary of that big corporation. So
Sure.
it wasn't quite the same, but we had all the rules and regulations around us of the big corporate. And I was like, holy cow, there's a lot of governance, and I get it. They've got a lot of people to manage. So I really understand that. But I also thought, hey man, can't we fix things faster? like, let's get some repair work done. Let's, hey, this isn't working well. How about we do something about it? And they're like, oh, we should get a committee together. And I'm like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
I don't know if we need a committee just to solve whether we use black ink or blue ink. I think we could just kind of resolve this right here, right now.
Yeah.
Who's with me? I'm like, nobody would raise their hand.
Totally.
I'm like, oh man, I'm on an island over here.
Yeah.
Tough world.
I just read, this is a name drop for Malcolm Gladwell. I don't know if you're familiar with Malcolm
Sure.
Gladwell. He's an author, and he's got a book called David and Goliath. And I just finished that a couple weeks ago, and it was really about a lot of this, where the Davids are the kind of underdogs or the misfits or the whatever you'd want to call them, where the Goliaths, like what in this example, big corp and people, governments and things that are like, oh my gosh, how do you ever get anything done in some of these scenarios? Yeah. And so there's a fascinating breakdown of all those, where it's really just talking about, and the stats that he threw out were fascinating around the majority, like it's like 70% of the time underdogs actually win. And so because of the fact that they're scrappy, they're looking at it from a different angle, they're willing to be creative on it, they're willing to, scrap it and start over the next day or whatever the thing is. So to your point, where it's like blue or black ink, can't we just decide? Let's just make this decision. This is really easy. We do not need to spend 6 months trying to figure this out.
Yeah.
But it was a great read because of that, because I think most entrepreneurs probably fit into that way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
I think most entrepreneurs are builders. And so you build things sometimes uniquely. Like not everyone's like this perfect set of Legos or whatever you get, right? Where it's like this perfect manual. And sometimes you're just like slapping these things together and somehow it works. And then you might refine it and get better at it. But it doesn't work that way. Once it's already built, you sometimes need a different person to go from 1 to 10 or whatever it is versus 0 to 1. So it's an interesting mentality, I guess.
Let's talk about some people in your life who came alongside you, Tyler, as you're coming through and figuring this thing out, finally going to take a jump from a corporate environment, feeling, pretty confident having been with a, startup consumer product to saying, hey, like maybe I feel good about, I know what the small consumer business looks like. So I've got an idea of, hey, I'm not going in blind. I'm not, jumping into dark water, not knowing if it's 6 inches or 60 feet. Right. Yeah. But, so you got an idea. I mean, were there people along the way, they influenced you? How did they show up for you to help you get to where you wanted to go?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, lots of different ones. I wasn't one of those people that like had this, I paid and I was part of this coaching program and these mentors, like it was way more of a relational side of things, maybe communities I was part of here and there, whether they're business or personal or whatever. And I mean, early on, I remember just asking a couple people that I would have deemed kind of like real successful entrepreneurs. So maybe that was just they started something and it worked, or they started 5 and sold 2 of them or whatever. But I remember having a lot like lengthy conversations with them early on. It's like, and I was mostly asking, well, do I do this? I mean, I've got little kids at home, mortgage bills, the whole thing. I'm basically leaving and saying, I'm not making any money and then need to figure out how to, first goal is obviously to, make your ends meet at the end of each month. And all of them said, yeah, absolutely. If you're wired this way, like, why would you not do this? Like, this is the time to do it. There isn't a bad time to do it. You know? And I think that, there's a lot of wisdom in that, because I think if you are an entrepreneur to the traditional sense, I suppose, you are willing to take risks and jump off the deep end and kind of do whatever it takes to accomplish whatever you're trying to accomplish, whether that's, trying to pay bills or launch product or have these conversations or prep for this meeting or whatever. But I think like it's in the wiring of most entrepreneurs, where they're willing to kind of jump off the deep end and not have, a really perfect plan, because they know that they've got to figure it out as they're mid-air before they land or whatever it is. So I think that was early on, was those types of people, like those mentors. And then I think more recently in the last like year or two for me, it's been people that are like hyper special, like specialties. And so, hey, this person, like I worked for about 6 months with the guy that launched the Bank of America home app, like back in like from 2010, worked for Bank of America. So he's like a finance nutcase, like, in a really positive way. But I learned a ton from him just around, the finance of business, the big business to small business to taking on investors to doing acquisitions, all sorts of things. And so obviously that's like a hyper-focused small piece of the pie. And I've had a lot of those going through the last number of years where, it's way less of a generalist and way more learning about kind of the specialties of whatever I'm trying to solve or figure out. So,
yeah. I have found many leaders to be extreme astute generalists.
Yeah.
And I call them astute because, they are generalists, often have a degree in something, an expertise in business, engineering, law, something, but working in spaces far from that now, and really managing the people. But astute meaning, while they're generalists in a lot of things, they are really above average in all those things. They've studied, they've really worked to know the important things, or they've really brought in the right people around them to surround themselves who need to know those things and given them the ability to do that. Meanwhile, like learning from them, right? Like watching them in action going, this is great. I'm so glad I don't have to do this. And you're awesome at this. That's totally great for me because I just be mucking this thing up if I was doing it. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like I've had both. Like, I feel like there's, there's an element where if you've got the finance, go buy the most knowledgeable, whatever expensive person you can find, right? That's going to help you get better at it. But sometimes you don't, and you got to just go figure it out on your own. And so I've done both, where you've got amazing people working next to you that you're literally trying to go, how can I get everything out of the way so that you can just run as fast as you can?
Yeah.
And then at the same time, had to figure out, like, how do you hone in some of these skills? Because I can't afford to hire anybody in that area for 6 months or something. I've got to figure it out first. I don't know. There's an element where I do like the learning aspect of it a little bit more potentially, because then you're able to help direct the person when it comes time where you could bring them onto a team or hire them. Mm-hmm. But I do like the speed if you bring somebody in that already is up to speed, if that makes sense, like around that certain characteristic or knowledge set. So I think probably both.
Yeah. I think one of the things that you mentioned that's kind of interesting to me is that, when you went out and asked these entrepreneurs, did any of these entrepreneurs tell you no, that they wouldn't take any time to talk to you?
I mean, maybe, but I think most of them were some of them I knew. Maybe I talked to, like, say, call it like 8, 9 different ones. Probably half of them I knew or had some sort of like, one phone call away type relationship. Yep. Others I didn't know at all. And I think I talked to all of them.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think most entrepreneurs are like super personable and want to share. Like, they're willing to, like, hey, how can I help? Do they just know, like, the where you're at usually? It doesn't take long, at least, for them to absorb it. So
yeah, and I think they love the conversations and the likelihood that when you come to me a challenge you're facing that I'm going to learn something is really high. Right. Yeah. Like, you're going to come into this major challenge. You're asking me, which, is an honor. That's awesome.
Totally.
And there's a chance I may not be able to help you, actually. Right. And, and I'm okay with that. And so oftentimes I don't like people to walk away without info. So, hey, I'm probably not the guy you should be asking, but I do know 3 people that are experts in this. Like, my network's pretty good, right? Yeah. And so I'm like, hey, Tyler, I'm going to connect you with a couple of friends of mine that I really think you should talk to about this. And then you and I circle back on a coffee and let's talk about what you learned and kind of next step this thing, right? And so I do that for 2 reasons. One is I want to feel like I gave value and contributed to your success, because I want to see you do well and I want to see all people do well. Yeah. And 2 is I want the learning, like, whatever you learned, I want that backup. Like, I want to go back and get what you learned and go, man, because I didn't know the answer either. And then you found it. So, like, what'd you learn, right? And so like that also helps, like, shape the next phase of things, of why you're going to go to where you're going to go now that you've learned what you've learned. And I think that's a really big deal. And I really feel like I think it may be getting better, but I do find like there's a certain person that is somewhat reluctant to ask for that help. And I'm like, man, you'd be surprised how much people really honor being asked for that help. I think it's a really big deal. And even if I'm having a bad day and my neighbor walks down the street and says, "Hey, like, man, my mower just went down. You think I could use your mower?" And I'm like, "Oh yeah, man. Like,
totally.
no problem. Of course. Like, this is, nothing." And I feel good about myself. Like, "Oh, hey, listen, hey, Dan and Megan's, their mower went down. So Dan came over and borrowed the mower." Like, I'm telling my wife, I'm telling my kids, like, I don't know if you know what I'm a really good guy, right? Like,
totally.
And I'm trying to convince them, I guess.
Yeah.
But I feel good about me. I feel good about me that I helped somebody out. And I hopefully contributed to a little bit better of a day when it wasn't going so great at the start of it. Right. And so for people out there, I think it's a really important lesson that Tyler has shared, which is, hey man, I'm young, I'm starting out. I don't know some of these answers. And I went to people who have been there before and know some of these answers. And they were happy to share. Yeah. I think that's a big deal.
Yeah. I think it's also like one of the things that I see a lot in like just kind of business culture is like a lot of people like use relationships, you know, so they like burn through them quickly sometimes, or they just are trying to use them to get what they want and then they bail. Like, I don't really agree with that. Like, I think that there are some that are like that, but I would say for the most part, you really never know when it might help to have that connection live again, or when it might help to maybe you reach out or you're trying to connect somebody you're talking to, like for your example, like, hey, I don't really know, but I know this dude or this gal, and she knows how to, solve this problem. And if you don't like maintain or keep your network, like it's pretty darn hard to be able to like unearth those when you needed it the next time or wanted to refer somebody to them or whatever. And so I think it's like focusing on, or at least having a focus on, keeping and maintaining a network, I think is really important. I mean, I think like for me, as I've gone through different like buying of agencies or acquisitions or selling or whatever, like I have a team of people that are really good at all the different aspects that are required in that. And I have to keep that network all the time because I don't know necessarily when I'm going to do the next thing or need evaluation work done or whatever. And I use these fancy examples like I feel like I'm more important than I am, but like that, the whole point of it being like making sure you're keeping up with those relationships, because you just don't know when you'll need them again or when somebody else might benefit from that relationship. So I guess that's just an encouragement to people to, keep that network strong. So.
Yeah, I think there's also amongst us entrepreneurs, I think there's also, and it's amongst athletes and things like that too, military personnel, I see it. There's kind of an unspoken too that, hey, Tyler, happy to help you. And when I call you now, Tyler, and say, "Hey, Tyler, I got this young lady who's coming out of college and she really wants to study marketing and she'd like to interview for her final dissertation and try to understand maybe how to go forward. Could you spend 35 minutes with her and talk?" Like, totally. Of course I'm going to do that for you. 100%, you helped me when I was in a time of need. Of course I'm going to do it. It's a reciprocal kind of deal. And it's expected, and it's not necessarily needs to be said, but it's a cool environment to be a part of.
Absolutely. Those have been super fun. I've done tons of those types of things where it's, hey, so-and-so's a junior in college, they're thinking about majoring in this, this, and this. They're trying to figure out what to do next and what to do when they get out of college. Would you talk to them about marketing? And you're like, of course. I have no idea if I'm going to share anything that they'll actually, that will be beneficial, but I'd love to meet them and talk to them and see if there's anything I can say that would point them in the direction. So I think that stuff's really fun. Like, I really do enjoy those types of conversations. But I think you're totally right. There is that like unsaid expectation or unsaid agreement kind of thing when people kind of refer you back to whatever that might look like, for sure.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Let's get into a little bit of, people out there. It's challenging. One of the things that I've seen is change is that there's a lot of different opinions out there now. It's very tough to get a clear vision. And as an aging person here, my vision is getting blurrier all the time, man. I think I need longer arms now to read things.
Yeah.
So, when we talk about clarity and vision, I mean, it's so important in organizations. It's so important on teams, yet it's a pretty challenging thing. I see in organizations, and a lot of organizations struggle with it deeply. Talk to me about, your experience with it.
Yeah. I've always kind of been, I guess, like hardwired as a little bit more of a visionary potentially. So for me, I haven't had to work at it a ton from a knowing it's needed. I've had to work a lot on how do you build it and actually make it, give it legs and make it applicable. But I think like for me, and I think everybody would be able to relate to this, where when you're part of a team or a org or even like a thing at church or a thing in your community or a baseball team at whatever, when there's more at stake or more that you're playing for or more that's like the direction is there's like more energy towards a certain thing versus those ones that feel pretty empty and like there's no point. And a lot of them is because there's vision to where you're wanting to go. That's all then connected and maybe like the culture of how that's operating. And so I think like the importance of it, we were talking about this example like before we hit record here, but or we went live depending on who you're looking at. I might have totally just destroyed it.
Fine.
But we were talking about this before we got started, and it was about like the idea of we've all like been on like Google Maps or whatever, and it's giving us directions, and like the minute it says like rerouting, and you're like, shoot, did I miss a turn? Like what's going on? And oftentimes our hardwire is to like get things done quickly. And my example I always go back to is that like direction is actually more important than speed, because if you're trying to go too fast, you might actually miss your turn and the directions example or something like that. And so part of that direction comes from the vision of like, well, where are you trying to go? What are you trying to do? How compelling is that vision? How easy is it to invite people into that vision? So just from an importance standpoint, I'm not going to give the frameworks and all those types of things of like, how I do it. But I think it's worth digging into for people that might, maybe have some question marks, I guess, of like, why am I doing this? What's my why is sometimes, a popular question I think that people sometimes struggle with. But I think it's important for lots of different things, from, hey, I signed up for a marathon, all the way to, I started a business and I hope I can sell it for $10 million someday or something. I mean, it's anything in between. I think little things can be driven by vision as well as big things can be. So super important, at least where I come from. So.
Yeah, it's funny because, one of the things that you and I share is, an attention to detail around steps, around process, around, getting around the order of things and following a path of success that's maybe been laid out before through the vision. When I come to my vision, I think one of those things I've had to learn, much like you, to how to put it in action, but also how to get, the buy-in of others, right? And have them see what I see. And that's not always been easy for me. But, one of the things that, we talked about being an introvert and, the laid back guy. Do you watch Ted Lasso?
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah. I love when he asks Trent Krim about, where's your bike? He goes, I don't actually know how to ride a bike. What is it? The hair?
Totally.
We make these assumptions about people, right? Here you're this laid back guy, you're the marketer, but yet internally you're a regimented guy. Like I see a vision and there's going to be steps to that vision in my mind. I'm thinking like, hey, A before B, B before C, C before. Are you trying to do E early? Because you got to go back and do D right. And you're understanding there's a thing here that if we get out of order, it won't be good. And let's talk about how we get that buy-in from teams on vision and the process. How do you do that well?
Yeah. Well, it's a great question, and you've analyzed me right. I definitely am like a reverse engineer of how things work. Like here's where you wanted to go, reverse engineer back to where you are today. Here's all the steps you take. And sometimes that's to a fault. My wife makes fun of me all the time on that, which is a different podcast. But but as far as like kind of activating people and bringing a team around it, I think that it starts with vision. Like I do some coaching of other agencies and other marketing groups on the side. And one of the things I'm always asking, because oftentimes they'll ask me, well, hey, who do I hire first? Or what job should I, go after? Or how much money should we expect to make? Or how much do I charge for the service or whatever? And I almost always go back to, cool, what's your vision? Like that, if we're doing a class and I'm teaching a class, that's the first topic. Because so much of it stems out of that. If you're not trying to build a team and you just want it to be a solopreneur, entrepreneur kind of experience, then I'm going to answer the question differently than if I know you want to build a team of 50 or something.
Yes.
And so I think you really do have to start with that vision first. And then I think, as you kind of start to frame that, and it's, simplicity of, well, what are you passionate about? The founder, almost it always starts with the founder, what they're passionate about. It can a little bit more over time from that, but oftentimes it's what are they passionate about? What's motivating them, those types of things. But I think getting your vision to a simplistic standpoint to where you actually can invite other people into it is really important. So sometimes people, hey, what's your vision? What's your 5-year, your 3-year, whatever? And it's like, hey, here's my 3 pages of the vision. And you kind of look at it and you go, well, there's no way you'll be able to actually repeat that or bring somebody else into that because they won't remember that. And so really boiling down your vision into kind of like a couple statements at most, a couple bullet points at most if you need to. But I think that part is the first, that simplicity, that clarity to be able to actually invite people into it. And then obviously, everybody talks about values and corporate values and whatever that is for your own individual organization. But I think that aligns with your vision, which then you always hire for your values. So then when you're bringing people into it, there's a little bit more of a natural kind of progression, I guess, if you will, when you're trying to invite people into that vision, because ideally they're kind of cut from a similar cloth, if you will, from a personality standpoint or from a characteristic standpoint of how they kind of function to be able to fit into that vision too. So I don't know if that makes sense, but that's kind of like the nuts and bolts of kind of how you would start to do it.
Let's finish with success. People define success a lot of different ways, and a lot of things that we talked a little bit offline about this in the past, where people decide like, hey, my success is going to be tied to something that I may or may not get to control. I'll use the example of housing right now. Like I've often looked at, hey, I think I'm a pretty successful guy if I've got a house and this neighborhood and this or that. And then all of a sudden, 2020 happens and housing prices go crazy. You go, you know what? You may not live in that kind of neighborhood right now. Everything's kind of changed and the mortgage has changed. And if your income has changed significantly, which mine did during COVID, when all of a sudden we shut the border to Canada down, right? And all my business changed. I mean, all of a sudden I was looking at, whoa, so I'm not successful because I'm not gonna be able to choose the couple neighborhoods that I really want to live in now. And so does that make me less successful? So talk to me a little bit about your kind of definition on that.
Yeah. So I don't know, this was a couple of years ago. I kind of got disrupted, if you will, when it came to what's my success. I probably I've grown up in the culture of more. And so more is better, whether it's I have a salary and I should just want more. It doesn't matter if I'm making $500,000 a year, I should just want more. And I think one of the things, so since I grew up in that, probably maybe 3 or 4 years ago, I met with a successful COO. So they'd run a couple of different organizations, and he actually ended up writing a book that was about success. And one of the things that he always said was, success is, okay, fill in the blank. And he'd literally stare at you and make you fill it in. And you kind of got this feeling that, oh crap, I have to answer this right. I don't know what the right answer is, but I have to answer this right, Yeah. And I think most of the time when we all kind of boil it down is if we said success is, making X amount of money, probably when you get close to making that amount of money, you'll just move the target endlessly, right? Or the success is this house or the car or the vacation home or the vacations or the whatever, right? And I'm not saying those are not, none of those things are bad, right? I'm not saying, oh my gosh, you can't pursue those. But I would say for me, I shifted a number of years ago for success for me is seeing other people succeed. And so it's, coaching, it's kind of sewing in, if you will, to people. It's helping them maybe fall on their face a couple less times than I have. It's, trying to help them from a career standpoint. And I think I learned that early on because in previous jobs, I'd hired people and brought them in and, they'd stay for 3 months to 3 years to however long. But I couldn't have the success of how many people I managed because I didn't have control whenever they leave or whenever they would, stay till or whatever. But I did have control of would they leave a better person than when they started, and whether that was, helping them personally, or whether it was helping them professionally, or was getting the right training or counseling or whatever the thing is for them. So I feel like in the business sense, like that's helped me a ton, just like shifting, like what do I actually, like what's the thing that actually like brings you like lifts your heart is what I call it. So the thing that actually brings you like some joy and excitement and maybe some energy, like when you get off of that type of a phone call, well, pay attention to it. What was it? Why was it? Why are you amped about that? It's like what you said earlier about, a neighbor, like their lawnmower goes down and you're able to like provide. And so helping people, I would assume, is high on your kind of like chart of things that you get excited about. And so you can help a lot of people and you can control that. Right. And like, that's not something that's like tied to the economy or tied to government lending or whatever, like it's not something that's tied to that. So I oftentimes, so that's one of the things I'll do. So I'll literally go back and go, what are the things that kind of lift my heart? What are the things that I'm engaged in, phone calls, meetings, people, activities that I get excited about? And then the other question I'll ask is what matters in 20 years? So when I'm going back to like some of those, entrepreneurs that I talk to, and they're in their kind of, I don't know, 60s, kind of more towards the legacy, leaving a legacy type part of their career. And like, when you ask them like, well, what mattered to you, 20 years ago, or what matters to you today? None of them are talking about, oh my gosh, you can't believe the cool car I bought when I was 42 or whatever. Like none of them say that. Nobody ever does. And the people that do aren't very interesting. And none of us really like them, years later, and again, have cool cars, live in sweet houses, go on cool vacations, treat people well, like all those things, like that's great. But I think that really shifted me along several years ago around, okay, what matters in 20 years? It's like, so for me, it's, I want to still stay, I want to be married. So like, that's a huge priority to me. So it means, what am I doing today, this week, this month? What am I doing to engage, be with my wife, build connection with her, prioritize her so that in 20 years, we're still married and that's still a thing. It's the same thing with my kids. Like, man, I'd love a relationship with them when they're 40, that'd be super fun for me. And so that starts to like be put on that list of success, and again, I'm not listing how much money I made and all those types of things. I think if you're an entrepreneur and you're listening to this, probably, what it's like to make lots of money and what it's like to make no money. And usually when you make lots of money, you have no time to spend it. And usually when you have time to spend it, you aren't making any money. At least that's been my experience of this far. Yeah. And so it goes up and down and like, of course, squirrel away some for, times when stuff's difficult, all that good stuff. But that's been harder for me to be able to like, oh, I pull this lever and this comes out at the other side and that makes me happy or is defined by success. And so I've tried to really hard to focus on, hey, what are the things that I can quote unquote control, if there's anything that we actually do get to control or not, and what energy you can put towards those to make sure that those are successful. So I don't know if any of that makes sense.
I love it. No, I love it. I love it. I think it's so important. And it's funny when you said that, because when people ask me, and I'm in my 50s now, right? So people ask me like, hey man, when you were 25, what you thought was important? And I used to ask people that too. And I always got a kick out of it, because when I would ask people when I was 25 or 30, they'd laugh. That would be the first thing. I was like, what was important? They'd laugh. They go, oh, what was important to me? And they're like, man, I thought this was going to be so important. And then they go, yeah, doesn't mean jack squat. Right. No. And now I laugh because I'm like, oh yeah, when I was 25, I thought this was important, So I really get that. Listen, man, Tyler, such a pleasure to have you aboard, man. Just thinking about our week, I was kind of reminded of this quote, if you're afraid of failure, you will never succeed. You have to take chances. That was Mario Andretti. Right. And, one of the greatest racers of all time, knowing like, hey man, there's a lot of risk involved. But man, prepared for that risk, like being educated about risk and talking to people. I love the idea of people getting a vision and being smart about that and simplifying and getting people to buy in on what that vision is and getting the right team who actually shares values around that. And then of course, our success and filling in that blank and not being something maybe out of our control inside that blank. And also having the vision of that 20-year window of like, hey, is this still going to be successful for you 20 years later? Like, is that still going to be defining success? So for Tyler, thank you so much, Tyler. Last one, where can they find you again?
Agency website, loanforcreative.com. Check me out on LinkedIn. So first name and last name on LinkedIn, also on Twitter, and then email. I think we'll throw all that stuff in show notes and descriptions and all that good stuff. So feel free to reach out. It'd be fun. Just let me know how you heard me or whatever, so that I have some sort of context of what crazy thing I said. But would love to meet people and chat with them. So
see you.